Hello everyone, this is Caleb Simpson, and you are watching my walkthrough for Chrono Trigger for Nintendo DS. This video covers the chapter titled The Fiendlord's Keep, otherwise called Magus' Castle in older versions of the game, and as soon as you arrive you'll notice that there is no music in the background. There's actually no sound at all except for just like opening chests and such, but what you want to do is as soon as you arrive there's nothing going on. There's just a bunch of characters that are walking around that are saying some very creepy dialogue actually, and some of them are just generic characters and other ones are characters that you should recognize, but the things they say seem not like the things that the real characters would say, so this is kind of a spooky development. But anyways, the whole point of this is just to kind of freak you out. So what you want to do is you want to just explore both sides of the castle. Just go up the far left side, open all the chests, and then go up the far right side and open all those chests too. These little kids here are protecting this chest, and we can't actually access it just yet, but we will be grabbing that here in a little while. Now this character right here, is you see Tabin right there that I just ran past. Now that character is actually based off the person you have in your third slot. Now if you'd like to see the dialogue for the various other options, you can actually swap out your third slot and then re-enter this room and speak with that character to see their dialogue instead. One other little detail worth noting is the fact that we have a bat following us, and this bat actually appeared as soon as we entered the magic cave, actually, and it's been following us ever since. So if you go back through the magic cave and leave, then this bat will abandon you. Now once you have explored both sides, you want to return to the sparkly here in the middle that is now here, and as soon as you do, then the screen will turn black, and finally we will then have some music as Ozzie appears nearby and confronts us. The music in this area is just great. It's nice and ominous. It's actually a very simple song, but it just fits so well. It's just kind of creepy and oppressive and stuff like that. And one of the things I think is really cool is Chrono Trigger has a really great battle song. I think the battle music is just super awesome, and it gets you pumped and it's exciting and stuff like that. But for this dungeon and several other areas of the game, they have select points in the game where the music just continues and the battle music doesn't start. You just have the same regular background music in the background. And I think I actually kind of like that more in general. But maybe it's just the fact that we have that transition where it's not normal is why it makes me excited, I guess. But I kind of like how the Magus' Castle theme just continues throughout all the combat in this dungeon. Anyways, now as far as these enemies, a lot of the enemies in this dungeon are actually susceptible to magic damage, and in particular, fire. So I would highly recommend you take Luca with you. You can use Frog to heal once he has learned enough XP and stuff like that. He has Slurp right now, but he will also learn an additional healing ability eventually too. But so you just use Frog for your healer for this dungeon is what I'd recommend. So because we're not going to be using him for combat in general, you're just going to use his regular attack, I'd recommend that you go ahead and instead of giving him the Power Scarf will increase his text. I think overall it's probably better for this particular dungeon to wear the Hero's Badge. This increases the crit chance of the Masamune so that it does more damage overall, so his auto attack is just a little bit better. And then as far as the accessories for your other two characters, Chrono can wear a Power Scarf or a Silver Stud if you have an extra one, but otherwise I'd highly recommend that you put a Silver Stud on Luca. The only reason that I have multiple Silver Studs is because I won some in the Arena of Ages. But yes, I would recommend that you take Luca with you for this dungeon because it makes it so much easier. A lot of these enemies are susceptible to fire damage, and the best attack you can use for this is Fire 2. Fire 2 is a very expensive ability. I haven't really used it so far, and I actually learned it fairly recently, but it hits all the enemies on the screen, and it does a pretty decent amount of fire damage. However, it is kind of expensive. So by wearing the Silver Stud, you can reduce the cost down to 4 instead of 8, and it makes it just a lot more viable for this whole area. Because these Lancers/Decedents are undead, they will actually absorb Shadow. It will heal them instead, so you don't want to use like Laser Spin or Supersonic Spin, but Fire totally works on them really good. They don't actually have that much health, so if you want to use regular auto attacks on them, that's fine. And as far as the Goaler, it's immune to all magic attacks, and you have to use physical on him. He doesn't really have that much health, so you can totally just take him out with your other two remaining characters. But yes, I think Fire 2 is generally speaking the correct choice for this entire dungeon, basically. And if you're looking at that MP cost for Luca and cringing, just something to be aware of is, like, you can use a Shelter on the Sparkly to restore our MP, right? And that's not very expensive. In fact, we can get a bunch of free shelters in 600 AD, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But as long as you have enough MP to kill all the enemies on one side, and in fact all these combats, this combat only starts if you speak with the Goaler. If you talk with the skeletons even, you can talk with them and nothing happens anyways. In fact, they actually beg you to kill them, which is kind of weird. Kind of creepy, just another little thing. They're like slaves or something apparently, which is creepy. But if you speak with the Goaler, you'll initiate the combat, but you can just walk right past them. You don't actually have to fight them at all. As I've explained before, if you just kill all of the enemies in every area once, I feel like that gives you a decent amount of XP so that you level at a decent rate for the entire game. Now, as far as what we're actually trying to accomplish in this dungeon, so we went to both the left side and the right side, went back to the middle, and then Ozzie confronts us, and now there's going to be enemies populated throughout all these areas. So now we're going back to the left and the right. You can do them in either order, doesn't really matter, so I'm going to the left first. Now, once you get to the end room, you need to speak with the young woman to the north, and this will cause all these skeletons to then attack you. You can kill them with either, Chrono's Lightning 2 or Lucca's Fire 2. Either one of those would be a good choice. You can also just use your regular attack to beat them up, but it just takes a little bit longer. So I think that using your ability is the right choice. Now, again, I would recommend you use whoever has the Silver Stud currently equipped to make that full screen clear more effective so that you're not wasting a bunch of MP. But whoever that ends up being, just use that character. Again, overall, I feel like Lucca is the correct choice because a lot of enemies in this dungeon are actually, they take additional damage from fire, so that's just a better choice overall. Now, it is worth noting you can also use Chrono and use Lightning too. However, I think that's not as good of a plan, both because some of the enemies are more susceptible to fire damage in general, but also Chrono doesn't have as high of a magic stat, so he just does less damage with Lightning 2 anyways. You might have to follow up with subsequent attacks, so Lucca can just get rid of them in one hit for most of the enemies here, and in fact some of the enemies here even heal with lightning damage, so it's just, yeah, Lucca's just a better choice if you're going to be going for using Fire 2 as opposed to Lightning 2. Now, as far as the left or right side of the dungeon, which one to go to first, it doesn't really matter, you can do them in either order. However, I would highly recommend you go left first, and the reason for this is because it unlocks a Sparkly that we can save at. Now, at those save points, you can also use shelters to heal your whole party, and also just save, which is very nice in case something goes wrong and you die on one of these bosses. So I'd recommend you take out Slash first, because then you will have access to that Sparkly. This particular boss is weak against physical attacks, meanwhile he's fairly resistant to magic, in particular against water elemental attacks, so he's very resistant to Star Ice and Star Water. Those are bad, you don't want to use those on him. I still think that Marle is a good choice to have for this fight because she can cast Haste on Frog in particular, because that will allow him to use his auto attack more often. Frog's regular attack, especially with the Masamune, especially if you have the Hero's Badge on, makes it so it does a lot of damage. It does as much damage as Chrono's Cleave / Spin Cut, just by itself, just critting. It's like pretty close to that damage already, and he's not expending any MP, which is great. So Haste will increase the damage of that, and he's not even wasting any MP at all doing that, which is great. But yeah, I would say Lucca is a really bad choice. She has Protect, which is a spell that will reduce incoming physical damage by 1/3, which is nice, but that she still doesn't have any damage to speak of because he's resistant to magic, and her auto attack is just terrible. So Lucca is just overall the worst option. Robo is probably overall the best. One of the cool things about Robo too is the fact that he has triple attack, otherwise known as triple raid, in other older versions of the game. But yeah, that's a triple tech between Chrono, Frog, and Robo, and it hits pretty hard for physical damage, and that would be a nice option for this boss as well. One of the other nice things about Robo is he can double up as a healer as well, even though he is slower. You can just kind of attack with either Robo Tackle, or you can use some of his other dual techs, or even triple techs, and then he can just go ahead and switch to healing once you need it. Now, once you've done enough damage to Slash, he will then move on to his second phase, in which he grabs a sword off the wall, and now he has increased damage as well as increased health. The two big things to know about this particular phase is the fact that now he has a Wind Slash ability that will hit multiple targets, and he also has a Lunge attack which will hit one target for a lot of damage, and that can be pretty rough. So you want to keep everybody like above 150 health just to make sure that nothing bad happens, but other than that you can just focus on attacking. Now, if you have Marle in your party, I'd recommend you reapply Haste, because remember, every time that combat starts, you have to reapply all your buffs. So even though we did just do this a little bit ago, this phase you have to apply it all over again. So yes, if Frog has the Hero's Badge equipped, then you want him to just attack regularly with the Masamune. If he doesn't have the Hero's Badge equipped and instead he has something like the Power Glove or the Power Scarf, then instead you want to use dual techs as much as possible, so use like X-Strike or Frog Launcher. Those would both do pretty good instead. Another strategy you can do is put on the Rage Band on one of your characters. I would say overall that the most beneficial character would be to use either Frog or Robo. What the Rage Band does is it has a 50% chance to counterattack whenever you're hit, and because this boss uses that Slash ability that can hit multiple targets, it means that that's going off pretty often and you're doing a lot of damage with it. Now, as far as which characters to put it on, I would recommend either Frog or Robo. The reason for this is because Frog has a 23% chance to crit on all of his attacks anyway, so he does a pretty good damage with his auto attacks, and that applies to his counters as well, so he has a 23% chance to crit on those too. So that's pretty nice. Now, Robo, on the other hand, he probably hits the hardest overall. The problem is just he's so slow that his auto attacks don't really hit all that often. But if he has the Rage Band, then that means he's hitting quite frequently regardless of his speed. I still think overall Frog is probably the best choice, especially if you're going to have him be your dedicated healer. So if you have Chrono, Frog, and Robo, whoever you're going to have as your healer, that's the one you want to put your Rage Band on, because that way they can be doing damage, and then meanwhile with their turns, they're doing healing instead. I think overall between the two of them, I'd recommend putting it on Frog, though. Like, if he's going to be your dedicated healer, then have him do that, and then that would be the best way to optimize the damage you're doing with the items you have available. I guess just to further clarify that reasoning, by the way, is that instead of having like the hero's badge, for example, which increases his auto attack, if he's only healing, he's not getting the benefit of that accessory at all. So you want to have something in that accessory slot that gives you some kind of benefit. And as long as you have more than enough mana, then something like the Silver Stud doesn't matter. So having the Rage Band is a really smart thing on your healer, but preferably not a healer like Marle. Marle just doesn't do good physical damage anyway, so her auto attack is just pretty bad. So the Rage Band on her is not very successful. But meanwhile, that item on Frog or Robo, because their auto attack hits pretty hard, it is a nice benefit for them. Meanwhile, you want to have items like, say, the Power Scarf on the characters that are actually doing your damage with their dual attacks all the time. So real quick before we move on, I'm going to show the second phase with the combination of having Robo in our party. Now again, as long as you did some other combat before we got here, you should have unlocked triple attack / triple raid. And this is a pretty hard-hitting attack that does, again, remember that every time that you add characters and also you add more MP cost, basically the damage goes up kind of exponentially. So a lot of our single attacks are doing like 300, 400 some damage. This does over 1,000, so it hits really hard. And for this phase, he only has 5,200 life, so just 5 of these will kill him. So as long as you just make sure that you kind of top off with healing every once in a while, then you should be able to kill him pretty darn good. Again, remember that his most scary attack that he has is Lunge, which will do about 135 damage per hit. So you want to make sure your characters stay above like 150 health-ish. So as long as you have more than 150, you're good to go. But if you drop below 150, you need to stop whatever you're doing and have Frog and Robo heal everybody. And again, like I was explaining before, a lot of attacks like this they typically scale with your strength / power stat, actually. So for each one of these characters, for this physical attack, for example, is all 3 of them. If you can put on like Power Scarves or Power Gloves, that will increase your overall damage for this tech. I think in this particular case, though, probably a Speed Belt on Robo would give you the best benefit, because then that way, because everybody's waiting on Robo. He's the slowest character in this particular case. So being able to have everybody use the triple tech at the same time as soon as possible is the greatest benefit for you. So once he's been defeated, 2 things will happen. A sparkly will appear that you can save at and use shelters whenever you want, so you might want to come back here and keep doing that occasionally. He will also drop the Slasher. Now this is a upgrade for Chrono that is a little bit nicer than the Mammoth Tusk / Flint Edge, which is what you could purchase in 65 million BC. However, if you were following along with me, I actually charmed off a Primeval Blade / Aeon Blade off of some enemies in 65 million BC, so I actually have an item that is 1 step above the Slasher, so I actually have an item that is even better. Now, if you want to use the Slasher, it does boost your speed. Now, I don't think there's any particular situation that would be nicer for that. I feel like if you were going to do that, it would make the most sense if you were needing to be faster to accomplish dual attacks, for example. The reason for that is because half the damage of your dual attack comes from Chrono, half the damage comes from another character. So him having a little less total damage, just him personally, doesn't really make too much difference. But still, even using single attacks, like say Cleave / Spin Cut, I still think the Primeval Blade / Aeon Blade is a better choice overall compared to Slasher. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, but Caleb loves speed. This can't be the right answer, but I do think that the Primeval Blade is just a better choice overall. So whatever you want to do, pick whichever one you're more comfortable with, and then continue onwards, this time going towards the right side. Again, you can do either side. It doesn't really matter which one you do first. I do think that overall the left side is the smarter choice, though, because then you get a save point you can come back to and use a shelter if you want. Now on this right side, at long last, you can now talk to the children here and tell them that you want the treasure to go ahead and fight them, and this will allow you to access the treasure chest. So go ahead and do that real quick, and then we can continue onwards. Now, these shadows are the same enemies that we fought in 2300 AD. Apparently in 1700 years they didn't evolve or upgrade their skills at all, so they're the exact same thing back here, so, or whatever. They're not any easier or any harder, it's the same thing. But just like back then, they, in 2300, or future then? Not back then. Just like eventually, they are more resistant to physical attacks. I think in particular, if I remember off the top of my head, they have a high evasion chance for physical attacks. So instead you want to use magical attacks, so like a Lightning 2 or Fire 2 would be a better choice overall. In this next room, you can optionally speak with the characters here that are very recognizable. They're clearly bad guys in disguise, but they say some pretty creepy things. And you have Chrono's mother, you have Queen Lean, and then the third character is actually based off of the other character that you have in your third slot. So there's actually 3 different possibilities. There's if you have either Luca, Robo, or Marle in your party, this will change who the creepy person with the dialogue is that speaks at this moment. So I'm actually going to show all the various dialogue options real quick just so you can see that for your own sake. And next I'm going to show some combat using Robo for these combat instead of using Luca. Luca is definitely the best because these enemies are all more susceptible to fire damage. If you are not going to have Luca in your party, then I think the best bet for all this combat is to put the Silver Stud on Chrono instead and have him use Lightning 2. One of the advantages of that actually is the fact that Chrono is pretty fast. He's a lot faster than Luca, so he can whip out that damage faster, and then hopefully you don't actually take damage from these bats, for example. Then you're just going to want to follow up with some physical attacks on the remaining guys. Now, otherwise, you can also use Laser Spin. Laser Spin just isn't quite enough, so you'd be better off using like the dual tech Supersonic Spin. Although, at that point, if you're going to be doing Supersonic Spin, you might as well just be doing just having the Silver Stud and having Chrono use Lightning 2 instead. So Laser Spin just isn't a very good ability. You can do it, it's just not really ideal. And for those of you who are wondering, I am actually kind of purposefully showing some not as good strategies for this part. I wanted just to show the reason why Luca is a good choice for this. Like, for example, in this particular fight, you have a Sorcerer, which is the guy in the middle, and he actually heals from all elements except for fire and physical, obviously. So you can use some really hard-hitting physical, will actually take him out. I think Frog is the best choice for this. Frog does additional magic damage. I think it's more so with, or additional damage to magical creatures with certain swords. I don't think the Masamune necessarily does that, but it does have a high crit chance. So, but anyways, regardless, Frog is very likely to kill the Sorcerer in one hit. So, if you use Frog to take out the Sorcerer, then you can use your other characters to kill everything else. You can either use Supersonic Spin, you can use multiple Laser Spins, or just use physical attacks. Otherwise, Luca using Fire 2 or Chrono using Lightning 2 is the best way to take those out. So yeah, this is like some not as good strategies. I'm showing some not as optimized ways of doing it, kind of. So if you really don't want to use Luca because she's too high level or whatever, then this would be like a team composition I'd recommend instead. Unfortunately, Marle doesn't really have anything to offer for these kind of fights at all. She's really good for the bosses, but all the rest of this dungeon, she's just terrible, so don't use Marle for any of this at all. So in the next room, we have a boss battle, and the first thing to know is that I don't think that Luca is a very good choice for this next boss battle. It doesn't really matter too much. You can do it, it's just the extra healing would be really important, so I would recommend that you have either Robo or Marle instead would be a much better choice for this next boss battle. Frog just can't quite keep up all on his own. The next thing to know is that there is an enemy in that room that is just a decoy. It's there to just destroy your MP is the purpose of it. So what happens is that enemy is called Flea with a question mark, and then if you attack it, then it only has 1 health, and it will counterattack by absorbing all your MP and stealing it. Now, one way you can avoid this, actually, is you can put a Rage Band on one of your characters. Now, if you're going to do that, I'd recommend that you put it on Frog. This gives you a 50% chance to counter when attacked. So this enemy will occasionally throw out little fireball things and will attack all your characters, and if it hits Frog, then it has a 50% chance for Frog to counterattack. Now, the counterattack does not cause the enemy's counterattack, and thus you can get through this phase without wasting any MP, because this enemy will not be able to absorb it from you. So this is a way you can avoid this entirely, so you can start the actual boss battle without having to use ethers or whatever on the character that the MP got absorbed from. So after that enemy has been defeated, you'll then hear a voice calling out to you, and the bat then transforms. It turns out to be the next mini-boss. Gasp! So apparently this bat that's been following us ever since Magic Cave has apparently been the mini-boss stalking us, which just adds to the whole, like, overarching, like, ominous feeling of this place and stuff. It's just cool. But anyways, he probably suspected something suspicious was going on with that thing, but so now it's finally revealed, the big reveal, that this is actually Flea, and this person looks like a girl, acts like a girl, talks like a girl, but is apparently a dude, which is weird in multiple ways, and it's actually kind of weird because the official artwork totally looks very feminine and stuff, and totally has opie and everything. It's a trap! And in fact, in Chrono Cross 2, when you hover over this character, it definitely has the like the male gender symbol as well, so this is a dude, which is weird. But anyways, I'll talk more about that later, but I think this character's hilarious, super over the top. I like how there's like all the hearts and all the conversations and stuff like that. And also, along the same lines, in Japanese, it's actually even more over the top because it's kind of hard to explain. It doesn't translate well in English, but there's all these like cutesy phrases and like endings to tags on the ends of words and stuff like that that are overly cutesy, feminine phrases and stuff like that this boss uses in all of his speech. So it's just even more extreme in the Japanese. It just doesn't translate well in English. But yes, my explanation for this is simply Japan. Need I say more? So anyway, the first thing to know about this boss is that just about all of his attacks apply status effects, and so there can be some nasty debuffs that are really awful. Now, I feel like the blind and poison are not too bad. They're not too big of a deal. Also, sleep is not a big deal either. You can go ahead and use a Panacea/Heal to wake up your characters if they fall asleep, but I wouldn't worry about it too much because this boss uses Rainbow Beam/Wind of Poison pretty often, and that attack will actually wake up your characters anyway. Like, by the time you spend using a Panacea/Heal, you're wasting that character's turn to use that item, and then shortly after that, by the time that both characters usually get their action gauge back full again, then the boss uses Rainbow Beam/Wind of Poison, which would have woken up your character anyway, you know what I mean? So I just don't really think it's worth dealing with. The poison, by the way, does not do very much damage, especially if you have either Robo or Marle in your party. You can heal for way more damage than the poison would deal, so I wouldn't worry about it. The status effect that's really more worth worrying about is the Chaos debuff, which makes your characters confused, and that is from either Waltz of the Wind or from Flea's Look. Those are two attacks that can do that. But yes, I would say that Chaos is definitely the biggest threat for this entire fight, so what I'd recommend you do is use a Panacea/heal as soon as that happens. As soon as one of your character gets a little star above their head, then use a Panacea/heal with one of your other characters to remove it as soon as possible. The next thing to watch out for is just the fact that this boss has a pretty nasty counterattack. However, my experience with this is it isn't always a counterattack. Like, I see a lot of conflicting theories online as to what actually causes this. Some people say, oh, it happens when you use magic damage on it, or oh, it happens when you use a hard-hitting physical attack on him, or it only happens at specific times, or like, nobody seems to know. My experience has been that I did this a lot of testing, fought this boss repeatedly. It seems like it only happens about halfway through the battle onward, and he can use it on his own. It isn't always a counter. However, it does have it seems like it's a chance for it to happen. When you attack, it's a chance for it to happen. So my recommendation would be to not use auto attacks as much as possible. Try to use dual attacks or even triple attacks if you can, because you can reduce the number of attacks you do, so you reduce the chance of the counterattack happening. So I guess maybe a better way of saying that is it works similar to the Rage Band, is that when you attack him, there's a chance for him to counterattack, but it doesn't happen every time. So I guess that's kind of cool in a way. It's almost like the theme of this boss is not just the debuff itself, but the fact of just the random chance of everything, the random debuffs that have a % chance to happen, and the counters apparently a % chance to happen, and it also happens as a regular attack, so you're not even sure what's happening. It's kind of cool because it's like the mechanics itself lend itself to this whole feeling of this boss being chaotic is what the whole point of this, the whole theme of it. The mechanics reflect that. And I think that's actually pretty sweet, and that apparently has caused confusion online, which in and of itself is actually kind of sweet. Like, yeah, that's a well-designed boss in that case, because it's intentionally meant to confuse people. Alright, so rewinding, I'm going to show this battle again. This guy, if you decide to attack him and not wait for the Rage Band to counterattack him, then whoever you attack him with, he will counterattack by stealing all of your MP before he kicks the bucket. So this is what you can decide who you want to use that when. I feel like that Frog would be the one that makes the most sense to steal his MP with. Chrono can use some pretty nasty single-target physical attacks, like he has Cleave/Spin Cut, which hits pretty hard, and he also has lots of good dual attacks with other people. Like, for example, you can use Fire and Ice Sword, which I didn't do in that last video that I showed, the last recording, but that is actually a good ability as well, and it does like 400 to 450 damage, which actually hits pretty hard. So that's another alternative. Again, like, some people theorize that using magic damage causes the counter. That's not it at all. It's just a % chance for it to happen. So don't worry about that aspect of it. So just, you can go ahead and use a mid-ether on whoever used up their MP at the start of combat if you want to, and then otherwise just go ahead and attack the boss. Now, if you have Frog and if you have Robo for your third-party member, something you can do is you actually have triple attack/triple raid, as long as you fought with them before this combat to unlock that tech real quick. But hits very hard, and it does almost 1,000 damage. This boss only has 4,000 life, so it really does not take very many of those to deal the damage anyway. And the funny thing about this is, even if the boss does cause confusion or like does a lot of damage to all your characters in general, as long as you have more than enough health to survive until that point, you might not even really have to heal. The biggest threat with this is actually going to be the confusion. Confusion can happen because of Rainbow Beam/Wind of Poison. Otherwise, it can also happen because of the counterattack. But because you're using a triple attack, you're not like hitting the boss very often, so the counterattack is much less likely to happen. In this particular combo, Robo has heals for a lot harder. Like, he costs more MP, but Cure Wave will heal more than Frog Slurp. So what I'd recommend you do is, if you are going to heal, then try to use Robo for your healing, and then have Chrono/Frog be the one to use the heal/Panacea to get rid of confusion. But yeah, you get the idea. This boss only has 4,000 life, so just like 4 triple attacks basically is probably enough to finish him off, and that's pretty easy, so don't worry about it too much. Also, if you're worried about healing, just remember too, you can always use mid potions. Don't forget that that's a thing, but that will heal you for 200, and if you have each character use a mid potion real quick, or even like 2 characters use a mid potion on the third character, you can easily get somebody from almost all the way dead to completely full in one turn, and it doesn't take very long at all. So you can totally do that even if you don't have a dedicated healer ready to go. So once the boss has been defeated, you can work your way over to Slash's side, because that's why I was recommending you fight Slash first, because you can go back over there and use his Sparkly. You can use a shelter there to heal, and that would be a good thing. If it comes down to it, another thing you can do too is you can go back through the magic cave, but that's a little bit awkward and you have to fight your way through enemies and stuff. It's just annoying. So going back to Slash's side is definitely the closest thing you can do. So now, after the boss has been defeated, be sure to pick up the magic capsule that he leaves behind on the floor. So one other strategy I wanted to address real quick is that one of the popular strategies online is to use Berserker Rings on Frog and Chrono to let them just auto-attack like crazy for days, and then have your third character be like Robo and he's auto-attacking or using Robo-Tackle, or Marle and she's healing, and then that third character is using like Panacea/Heal to whenever anybody gets confused, and then otherwise the other two characters are just auto-attacking the entire time, and they say that's a really great way to get through that boss battle. I actually feel like that's terrible, terrible advice, and I want to kind of dive into that a little bit and explain why. What the Berserker Ring does is it makes your characters auto-attack forever and you have no control over them, but meanwhile it increases their accuracy/hit, and it also increases their physical defense. Now, that boss actually does magical damage. That's all he does. So physical defense doesn't help with that. He actually does do, like he has his Kiss ability and also his Slap. He has a Slap attack as well. And both of those do physical damage, but it's literally his lowest damage ability. It's pathetic and it's kind of rare. It doesn't really happen that often. So that's not really worth considering. And then the other attack that's physical is when Flea uses Flea's Look/the Looks, or the Stare. That ability is a counterattack, and it applies confusion to Chrono, which is awful, and you want to remove that as soon as possible, but then it also causes Chrono to do this, like, Omni-Slash thing, where he does damage to your whole party that is physical damage, that is based on how much physical defense you have. So yes, Berserker Ring will reduce the damage of the counterattack. However, remember that the look only happens, that nasty ability only happens when the boss counterattacks, for the most part, remember? So if you're using the Berserker Rings, you're attacking as fast as possible, as soon as possible, you are causing more counterattacks than if you just used dual techs, and dual techs do more damage than your auto attacks anyways. Remember that Chrono and all the other guys do not get increased damage from accuracy/hit, the girls do. So Marle and Luca will get increased damage from the Berserker Ring, but the other guys don't. Now, the accuracy will, like, reduce the negative deficits from the blind debuff that the boss is casting, so you just don't have to worry about that as much, but I don't feel like that's enough benefit to justify forcing counterattacks to happen so you're taking massive damage all the time. Does that make sense? So it feels like, and then what happens is because Chrono and Frog are just stuck in Berserker mode all the time, you have, like, no control over what's happening. You literally have one character to rely on to remove confusion and stuff, and then if that character gets confused or falls asleep, then you're like, it's just awful. Like, you're just suddenly, you have no control over anything for several turns, and then everybody meanwhile can die. So it just feels like an overly suicidal strategy to me, and I just don't think it's good at all. But yeah, I would say, like, regular attacks versus X-Strike, for example. X-Strike does something like 50 to 100% more damage, which is a lot. That's a huge boost. So if you're gonna do double the damage for just the cost of a little MP, as long as you have the MP to support it, it just is superior. And because you're attacking half as often, because you're doing a dual tech instead of two individual regular attacks, you're doing more damage, you're causing half as many counterattacks, it just is better. But yeah, like I say, that's a popular strategy online that I was seeing like all over the place on the internet, so I just figured I would address it real quick because I know a lot of you will probably ask me about it and talk about it in the comments and stuff. So next I went back to the left side to go to the sparkly that appeared here after we defeated Slash, and I saved here and also swapped out my characters back and forth repeatedly so that I could use a shelter and heal and restore all of their MP on all of my characters. Now all of them are completely full, and that did cost 3 shelters, which is kind of expensive, but it's not really that big a deal. Just so you know, too, just to put in perspective for you, shelters are way cheaper than using a whole ton of ethers, like by far. So shelters are way more economical, so I'm not too worried about it. Also, I got a whole bunch of free ones, and I can get them pretty easily. I'm not worried about it at all. So as a reminder, if you put on funky accessories, I'd recommend you switch them all back again, and then you should have Luca in your party to do fire damage again. Remember that most of the enemies in this complex are all like really vulnerable to fire damage, so Fire 2 is amazing. Just put a silver stud on her, and she can just go to town on them. Now, if you only have a couple enemies, you can save a little MP by just using auto attacks on them, but otherwise, if you have more than 3, if you have 3 or more enemies, you want to use Fire 2, would be my recommendation. So a lot of the fights in this dungeon so far, you could have actually avoided. You can just run past everything, and you don't have to fight them at all. I do feel like overall it's worth it to kill most of the stuff, as long as you're not, like, returning to previous areas over and over and over again. I don't think there's any problem with killing everything in your path, just in general. But you could have avoided a lot of the combat so far, but now we have this gauntlet before we get to the next bosses, and I think this is actually intentional on the developer's part, not just for the cinematicness of it, but actually because it's a more practical reason. They're trying to extend the gameplay, but more so, I think they're actually trying to do this to make sure that Frog gets enough TP that you're guaranteed to learn Star Heal, which I just did a moment ago. And that is a very useful healing ability that is going to be really good for the Magus battle up and coming. So just a quick observation for you, this whole dungeon is all about trying to throw you off balance, like creepy music, like things are not what you expect them to be, there's traps all over the place, you can fall through the floor, there's save points that aren't actually save points, there's whatever. There's enemies are taunting you with creepy things, so characters aren't actually who they appear to be, and it's just all about trying to throw you off balance. And thus, we have characters like Flea, who has this whole gender bender thing going on. But just a quick observation for you about him as a character that I always found kind of weird is I think it's strange that he's so insistent on looking like a female and acting like a female and speaking like a female, especially in Japanese. The text is very different in Japanese, or it stands out more. It's much more apparent, doesn't translate well in English. But he's doing all these things, making these huge efforts, and yet he's still insistent that he's a guy, which is weird. Or like, you think like somebody who's trying that hard, they would consider it a compliment or something like that, and yet he's like almost offended at us for assuming that he's female, but whatever. Anyways, I just think it's strange, like a contradiction in his character, kind of. But I think that's kind of the whole point, because that's the theme of the dungeon, you know? So once you get to the end of this first middle hallway, you want to open the nearby chest to get a mist robe. This is a very nice chest piece for our girl, so I definitely recommend you put that on Marle. Luca, meanwhile, you should still have Tabin's Vest, which is a really good chest piece for her. It increases her speed, very valuable. Next, you want to just stand on top of these conveyors, and then just time your movement so that you're moving when the guillotines are at the highest point. Next, you'll find a chest that contains the Dark Mail. I highly recommend you put that on Frog because he has the lowest magical defenses of our current characters, so that's a really good thing for the upcoming boss battle. It also has really high armor in general. Now next, Ozzie will then start moving the guillotines much faster, and what you want to do is I just recommend you get a running start for it. Just wait until the guillotines are kind of like getting towards their highest point, and then just run for it. You can easily make your way all the way through here. You can go slowly and go in between the last two, but it's way more awkward. At the end, there is a Death Claw. This is an upgrade for Robo. However, I do actually have a Magma Hand on right now, which is an even better weapon for him that I got by charming off of enemies in 65 million BC. But yeah, it's up to you to decide whether you want to use a Mist Robe on either Luca or Marle. Like, Luca, you can use it, but I think the Tabin's Vest is just way better, so I'd recommend you put it on that one instead. Now, in this next room, you can totally avoid most of the combat by just simply hiding on these little chains, whatever. You can climb down on them like little ladders, and then you can avoid the Rollos, or Roundalos is the other name they have. But this way you can avoid the jugglers especially. They're kind of annoying, but just use fire attacks on them is the easiest way to take care of them. Just use a hard-hitting fire attack. Now in this next room, we have some pits that are invisible. You can't actually see them, and what happens is you can only fall down them once, and you do want to fall down. So just, my recommendation is go along the outside of the room. This is the easiest way to get through it, and what will happen is you'll fall down and find yourself with a bunch of Decedents/Lancers. Just go ahead and use either Lightning 2 or Fire 2, and you can defeat them all. Just don't use Laser Spin, would be bad. So after they're defeated, then what'll happen is you want to run around real quick before you do anything else and open up all the chests, and then find the magic capsules in the bottom right corner. I know that one's kind of hidden, it's not like as apparent, but make sure you grab that before you leave because that's very valuable. Also, this one is very easy to miss because you can only fall down the holes a certain number of times and then you can't come back here. So make sure you grab this, and then next we're going to go stand in the Sparklies. There are 4 Sparklies in this room. 2 of them are enemies, and they're always on the opposite side of the room. So in this case, the southern one, it's random where the positions of these are going to be, but their orientation is always the same, kind of. They can be flipped around, though, or rotated, rather. So here, the bottom ones are enemies. You want to use magic on them because they're pretty resistant to physical attacks. I think they're actually just like shadows, actually, is what they are. They just have a different graphic instead. So the top one's going to be enemies as well. So in this case, south was an enemy, so the north one's going to be enemies, and then either the left one or the right one is going to be the save point, and the opposite one is going to be a teleport that takes you out. If you did not manage to save, then you want to go back in and try again. So just when I tried, and the first one I tried happened to be the save station. So go ahead and use a shelter to restore mana for Luca especially. Would be nice, just to make this next area a little bit easier so you don't have to spend ethers on it. And then the opposite side is going to be the teleport. Meanwhile, again, north and south is going to be the enemies. It just happened to work out that way. This whole position of all these things rotates, so these 2 are enemies. I'm just showing the fact that those are enemies, and then I'm not actually touching them. And then this one's going to be the teleport. It just happened to be in the same position as the last time I fell down, but it's randomized every time you go. Now, as far as to avoid the holes, the easiest way I have to do this is to just go the long way around, just follow the outer wall, then follow it very closely, and then go north, and there's actually another pit right in front of Ozzie. But this way you can get through here with the least number of holes, like problems, whatever. But yeah, I'd recommend you fall down at least 1 hole so you can get the magic capsule and the other goodies. So in this next stairway, we have a bunch of kind of nasty enemies. So first of all, we have some outlaws. These guys are pretty easy to deal with, but the thing is, you just don't want to use either light or fire on them because they're immune, and it will cause their counterattack. So if you hit them with anything, but you don't do enough damage, it will cause their counterattack, and that's kind of awful. So it can escalate and be bad. So just don't use Fire 2 or Lightning 2. You want to attack those guys with physical, and then meanwhile, the other enemy is a juggler. Those guys also have a pretty nasty fire counterattack, but they also have quite a bit of health. However, luckily, they are extremely vulnerable to fire. So what you want to do is use like Starfire with Luca on the jugglers to kill them, and then meanwhile use physical attacks with the other guys on the outlaws, and that's how you can get through here without taking a lot of damage. Now try to space out these battles so you're not getting hit by these roundelo bombers. These guys have a pretty nasty self-destruct which can hurt quite a bit, so just be aware of that, but if you can just avoid them entirely would be a little bit better. So just hide on these little stairs, the chain stairs, whatever, and then, or chain ladder? Chain ladder. And then you can move over. I think a chain ladder would be really hard to walk up, you know? Like, at least ropes are like a little bit more stiff. Well, I guess chains can be stiff too, technically. I don't know. Whatever. It depends on how tight they are together, I guess. I'm not even sure what you call that, but you can, sometimes you can make chains actually that are kind of flat. They're not very round, and those ones can actually link together a little bit nicer where they stay really rigid, and they don't like to, like they can bend one direction, but they don't bend the other direction, so sometimes that can be kind of nice. I suppose if you made a chain ladder like that, then that would actually be pretty stiff and you could step onto pretty easily, I suppose. I suppose the whole reason for using a chain ladder, though, is to the fact that it is flexible. Like, the thing about it is you could do something like, you know, put it over, like, a giant round object, for example, and you can't really do that with a stiff ladder. You know, that's the whole reason why you'd want to use rope or chain for something like that. I suppose the other reason would be, like, a rope or a wooden ladder can potentially burn because it's combustible, so meanwhile a metal one is not combustible. This is like aluminum or something like that, but that's a whole different thing. It would have to get really hot to do that too. So here you'll notice too, I accidentally used Fire 2 on these guys. I didn't do any damage to them, but I didn't counterattack with it. Maybe they only counter with physical though. Oh well, whatever. So maybe it's not the end of the world to use Fire 2 on them. And again, I suppose they wouldn't even have aluminum. I don't know. I know aluminum was like supposedly really expensive to manufacture. They didn't even have the technology to even do it. But eventually then the manufacturing costs went down because they had new methods of doing it. But it seems like the time frame this is probably in compared to our world and also like the type of technology I see around, they probably don't have access to aluminum yet. And even if they did, it would be way too expensive. Something like steel or iron would be a lot more common. I suppose if you want to be really correct here, it'd be aluminium is what you're supposed to do. Aluminum is actually just a slang pronunciation. It's not correct at all. Just kind of like laboratory instead of laboratory, you know, same kind of deal. Once you reach the end, you'll have this comedic meetup with Ozzie, who then runs out of enemies to throw at you and runs away. And then after that, we can open the chest to find a second speed belt, as something you got the one back in Minoria Cathedral along with me. Technically, you could go back there actually and get that, and there's no enemy encounters anymore too. So if you wanted a second speed belt and you didn't get that one earlier, you could do that now. It's one thing that happens with Nintendo games a lot. This is actually, I mean, yes, this was produced by Nintendo, but this is more of a Square game. That's really where this came from. But a lot of Nintendo games especially do this, where a lot of character names and such are puns. So the names of Ozzie and Flea are actually references to other things. In the Japanese version, they're actually references to condiments. So Ozzie's name is actually vinegar, and then we have soy and what was the other one? Mayonnaise. Yeah, Mayonnaise or whatever is what it is, which is a reference to mayonnaise. But anyways, so that's their names in Japanese, and it's also slightly punny names too, just the way they're spelled and stuff like that. They're meant to be kind of tongue-in-cheek joke. But anyways, in English, where they translated it, they actually renamed them slightly to make them references to musicians instead. And this is actually a reference to a comment that one of the people in town says. They say something, one of the villagers says something like that they're fiends, they're not like humans at all, they're just like fiends, and they have no souls and everything like that. In fact, they're so like not normal, whatever, they're completely tone deaf and stuff, and it's a joke because their names are references to musicians. So anyways, Ozzie is a reference to Ozzy Osbourne, of course. Flea is a reference to the bassist of Red Hot Chili Peppers, which is Michael Balzari. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then meanwhile, Slash is a reference to Saul Hudson. I'm not really entirely sure I understand the reference to that, but I did just look up that information real quick. So that's where that came from. Now, once you get to the final room, you will get a second mist robe. You can equip that if you like to make this battle a little bit nicer, but it doesn't really matter. This particular battle is kind of irrelevant. It's just a joke battle anyways, because Ozzie is just a joke in every situation. I also sort of idly wonder if these enemies are slightly a reference to the Three Stooges. I do feel like Ozzie fits that category because I can't remember I can't remember what their names are, but whatever. The big guy. The big guy was kind of the stupid one, although they were all kind of stupid, you know. But they were constantly like, he was the one being ridiculous, and Ozzie is being ridiculous. And meanwhile, you have Slash as like the straight man, you know. I'm not sure about Flea if that exactly fits that same mold or not, but it could very well be a reference to that. Japanese tend to be like kind of tongue-in-cheek again about how they approach all their jokes and stuff like that. All you have to do for this battle, if you attack Ozzie directly, then he will counterattack, and it actually does some pretty nasty magic damage. All you have to do is you have to attack the other target, which in this case is only one at a time, and each time it will be one of these levers which will then create these various holes nearby. Once you smack the final one, though, then it will cause Ozzie himself to fall down, and thus you defeat him. Fun fact about this boss battle, by the way, is that if you do enough damage to him, eventually you can actually run his health down. If you wear the sight scope, you can actually see that he only has 1,000 HP, which isn't really all that much, but once you have dealt enough damage to him, then he will actually disappear as a target, and you can't target him at all. Although the only attack he has is a counter attack. He does some pretty severe magic damage if you smack him, but once he's untargetable, then you can't smack him, and thus he can't hurt you at all. And then you are forced to hitting the levers. So anyways, even if you were doing this totally wrong, so to speak, then it is possible for you to win eventually. You know, it puts you in a position where you're forced to win at that point. So anyways, after he's been defeated, this is one of the only boss battles in the game, by the way, that gives you 0 XP and 0 gold, by the way. Next, you want to go ahead and use the save point over on the right, and you can go ahead and heal up your characters and save real quick. And then the left sparkly is actually a portal that will take you towards the final boss room. There's a bunch of bats along the way, and all you have to do is enter the doorway on the end, and you can go back the other way the same way and just step into that sparkly to return to Ozzie's boss chamber. Now, that's all well and good. If you want to get some additional TP in order to unlock some abilities, you can fight those bats and they keep reappearing over and over again. So that's probably the best place to do that right now, and you can heal at the nearby sparkly by just using shelters again. Now, the reason that you'd want to get more TP in particular would be to make sure that you have unlocked Star Heal with Frog in particular, would be a very useful skill for this upcoming fight. You could grind for a long time to learn Leap Slash / Aerial Strike, and that would be a really good ability for Frog as well, although I think that's overkill and that's unnecessary. Another ability that would be super useful is probably Heal Beam with Robo, would also be really cool, but it's unlikely you have that either. Now, as far as equipment, I'd recommend you put the Dark Mail on Frog, would be very useful, and you can choose either between the Hero's Badge to increase his Masamune damage, or the Rage Band to make it so that he does additional damage whenever Magus uses full target attacks. That's what he does like all the time. He's constantly attacking the whole party, so the Rage Band on somebody is really good. It is worth noting that there is an animated cinematic that takes place right now too in some versions of the game. I have that cropped out, but if you would like to watch that, then just do a search online for Frog Magus cinematic, and you should find it right away. So the first thing to know about Magus is the fact that he has a barrier. What this means is that he will absorb all elemental damage and will actually heal him instead, unless you use the appropriate element type. And the appropriate one you can tell when you attack him. So right now I'm attacking him with Chrono on purpose to change his element. So he counterattacks by changing his element to something else. So right now he just changed it to water, which is actually great. That's what I want. So he does damage to the whole party as a counterattack, but now his element has changed to water, so I want to use a water-type attack. So my options are I can use either Star Water with Frog, which is bad. Frog's magic damage is terrible. But I can also use Dual Techs. So what I want to do is I want to use a Water-type Dual Tech. And you can tell when you're looking at the tech list, look at the icon in the description. It says, has a little water icon. That's how you know. Like, for example, there's a Dual Tech between Frog and Robo called Bubble Breath. And that one does not have a water icon because it's actually physical type. Don't just go off the name of the tech. You want to look at the description because it'll tell you what type of element it is. But yes, wait to see what element Magus has, and then you want to use an appropriate tech for that. You can use single techs, but I'd highly recommend you use dual techs because they just do significantly more damage. Now, something else to know is that Frog has the Masamune, and what the Masamune does is it doesn't cause the counterattack. Frog can just attack him regularly all day long, and Magus does not react to that. What it does is it doesn't cause the counterattack, it doesn't cause the barrier change, but it will reduce Magus's magic defense, which increases the damage he takes from other attacks. So one valid strategy you can do for this fight, which I know might seem a little bit contradictory, is just chill. Don't do anything with the other characters because the majority of the damage you take from Magus is because of the counterattack. So if you just sit there and just wait and don't do anything yet and just make sure use your other characters to top off and keep healing or whatever, and then just have Frog just auto attack for a while, then what'll happen is Magus will continually take his magic defense will keep being reduced, and then when you finally do switch to attacking him with dual techs, you'll start doing significantly more damage. The Masamune actually increases the damage that Magus takes by quite a bit, so hitting him with your regular attack with Frog is really, really good. So yeah, that's one other valid strategy, is don't attack for a while, just let Frog punch away at him for a while, and this will steadily make him take more and more damage. So, what should you be doing with your 3 characters? Frog, his Masamune attack will reduce Magus's magical defense and it doesn't cause the counterattack. So just try to do that whenever you can because it will increase the damage that Magus takes. So just keep attacking like regular with Frog whenever you can. Otherwise, my next recommendation is don't use Slurp. His healing, single target heal is awful. It's really, really bad. However, Star Heal, which heals the whole party, is actually pretty good. So you can totally have Frog do that a whole bunch, and that will heal the whole party, and it does pretty decent. Otherwise, you can also occasionally do dual attacks with Frog, but yes, basically focus on doing regular attacks with the Masamune and using Star Heal if you need to. Meanwhile, with Chrono, what do you do with him? I want Chrono to be doing regular attacks to change Magus's barrier to something else. So if his barrier color or whatever, if an element I don't want, then use Chrono to switch it, don't use somebody else. And then just use his regular attack for that. Now, if it is Lightning, you can go ahead and use Star Lightning as long as you're changing it anyways, you might as well. However, in general, just try to keep Chrono reserved to use various other techs. So, like, keep him reserved to use dual techs because Chrono has some really versatile techs that will change to other people's elements, like Sword Stream, for example. It's a water element. So by boosting everybody else's damage, or like Supersonic Spin with Robo, then you're doing shadow damage, but you're doing more damage than Laser Spin by itself would do. So Chrono is on dual tech duty, basically, is what he's doing. So then the third slot, I highly recommend you use either Robo or Marle, because their single target heal is really great. So Frog can do the multi-target heal pretty well, but then he kind of suffers at single target heal. So have your third party member either use potions or use Cure Beam or Aura or Cure, and then that will allow you to top everybody off. And you can use Luca as well, but I don't really think that matters too much. I think using Luca for this fight is bad. But anyways, so then what happens is, when the boss gets to about 50% life, which is I think 3,333, then what happens is, then he switches and he stops doing the barrier thing entirely. He just abandons it. He doesn't do it anymore at all. And his physical defenses drop, actually, and then he's suddenly more vulnerable to physical. So his magic defense is based on how much you reduced it with Frog's regular Masamune attack, but then meanwhile his physical defense is very high up until he drops his barrier, and now he takes increased damage from physical. So at this point, once he lowers his guard and he doesn't have a barrier anymore at all, he'll say, Magus risks casting a spell, and his guard is lowered, whatever, and then he starts casting this nasty dark matter ability, which hits really, really hard. It does 250 health of damage, which is really bad. So just make sure your characters have like at least 300. You'll notice all my characters on screen currently have 300, so even if he does unleash it, I'm okay and it doesn't matter. So now I'm just trying to unleash as much damage as possible. Again, you can only use dual techs, and otherwise if you have a triple tech, such as triple raid, triple attack, you can use that instead to do massive damage to him. So next I'm going to show this combat again, this time with a different team composition. I feel like overall Marle is the highest damage character you can possibly have for that, which seems contradictory because Marle is a straight up healer, right? So like, why would this make sense? The reason is because, as I was explaining earlier, this boss does a whole bunch of full party damage, and so the best healer for that is actually going to be Frog, because he has Star Heal, which is great. So Frog's going to be alternating back and forth between doing his regular attack to lower Magus's magic defense, and then using Star Heal to heal everybody. Ideally what I want to do is I want to switch his element to water, which it just so happened to do for this particular fight, and that's exactly what I want. So now I can do extra damage to him. Now I do have Sword Stream, which is a dual attack between Chrono and Frog. However, that doesn't do very much damage because it's based off of Chrono's physical damage, which Magus is resistant to, and Frog's magic damage, and Frog's magic stat is terrible. So, meanwhile, Marle has a really high magic stat. So one of the mages you want to use either Fire Sword or Ice Sword is way better. So instead, I switched his element to Ice, and now I'm going to use Ice Sword, which is really, really good. And next I'm going to be using Frog with Star Heal to top everybody off, which is going to be my best healing ability for this particular fight. One of the advantages of having your other two characters being the ones doing damage is now Frog can focus exclusively on healing and lowering Magus's magical defense. And lowering his magical defense means he's taking more damage from the other two characters. Now, using Robo in that third slot is only really good if you're trying to rely on using triple attack towards the end of the fight, is why that's good, and also the fact that he has healing. But otherwise, as far as raw damage, I think Marle is actually a significantly better character because you keep lowering his magical defense throughout the fight. This is an extremely synergistic team composition for this particular fight, and Marle can haste all your characters to make them really, really fast, which means towards the end, you're able to dish out some serious damage. Now, if he has an element you don't want, as long as you have enough health to deal with it, then you can switch his element whenever you want. And I would do this with Chrono. You can either use his regular attack, or in my case, I was just using Cleave/Spin Cut because I might as well. I have more than enough MP for it, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm just doing a little bit additional damage damage to switch his element using a physical attack, but I just used a tech because I might as well. One cool little nuance about having Marle in your party is that both Frog and Marle take 20% reduced damage from water-type attacks, which means that when he uses Ice 2 like this, then you're not taking as much damage. His element is Ice, and I can follow up with Ice Sword, and then have Frog use Heal or whatever, and I will survive that next counterattack very easily, as opposed to using a different character for that third slot, and then everybody's taking reduced damage from a different element. Now, at a certain point, you're going to get to this point where Magus is at half health, and now he's not counterattacking at all. Notice this? So as soon as he starts doing this, what you want to do is you want to quickly top off, make sure you have at least 300 life on all your characters, and then just go hardcore, just do as much damage as you possibly can. Now, at this point, he's not counterattacking, and his physical defenses are lowered, so you can switch to physical attacks if you want. And that means abilities like Robo Tackle, or Slurp Cut, or Aerial Strike ideally, or Leap Strike. You know, if you have one of those abilities, those are all pretty good. You can also use Luca in place of Marle, but then she doesn't have haste and stuff, like, it's just, and she doesn't have healing, it's just not as good. So, besides, Luca was really good for the rest of this whole dungeon and stuff like that, so this gives Marle a chance to shine. Another little detail about that you might not have noticed is the fact that because Frog is hasted, because I have Marle in my party, that means he's able to hit Magus with Masamune twice as often, which means he's lowering his magic defense, which means my other characters are doing more damage, but also he's able to cast Star Heal more often, and that's why my characters are staying topped off. It's a full party heal. The heal is just kind of okay, but because he's hasted, he's able to do it twice as often. And that means even though like some of my characters were getting single-targeted pretty hard, I didn't have to heal with Marle because Star Heal was so good. The funny thing is, like, one of the downsides of having Marle and using haste is that then she's busy for the first little bit of the fight, casting that and stuff like that, but for this fight it's perfect because I want to wait until his magic defense is lowered before I start attacking him anyway. And I know the fight's kind of over now, but I do just gotta say that Magus has one of the coolest boss battle songs ever. So earlier in the game, some of the fiends told us that Magus created Lavos, and so we were coming back to this time period to interrupt his ceremony, but apparently he didn't create him at all. He was merely trying to summon him, and we apparently screwed up his plans, and we don't really know the whole story. We don't know what's going on. So this is not actually where Lavos was created, so we need to go further back in time and figure out what's going on. Unfortunately, by ruining the ceremony, we also created a gate, which then sucks up our entire party and spits us out in a new time period. And we'll learn more about that in the next video. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this and found it helpful, be sure to throw a like on it and subscribe. All your support really does help. And check out my other playlist for more content just like this. As always, stay awesome, have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.